So, what did it really take to rule a kingdom in medieval India? Was it all about having the biggest army? Or was the whole game of power something way more complicated? Well, we're about to find out.
In this explainer, we're going to dissect the anatomy of power in medieval India. We'll look at how rulers built their kingdoms, how they held on to them, and how they showed off their authority in a world that was just full of competition.
Okay, first up, let's try and step into a king's world. See, to be a ruler, it wasn't enough to just be powerful. You had to look powerful. You had to project this image of immense wealth and almost godlike authority for everyone to see. And one of the best ways to do that was by building absolutely magnificent, super decorated temples. Now, these weren't just places to pray. They were basically giant billboards screaming, "I'm powerful and I'm rich." Of course, that also painted a huge target on their backs for any rivals. There was one ruler from Afghanistan who pretty much turned this whole strategy of targeting a rival's pride and joy into an art form. His name was Mahmud of Ghazni. Get this. Between the years 1000 and 1025, he raided the subcontinent 17 times. Just let that number sink in. 17 military campaigns in only 25 years. That is absolutely relentless. And you've got to understand, his raids were a really smart strategy. He went after these incredibly wealthy temples, like the famous Somnath Temple in Gujarat. And the loot he took wasn't just to make himself rich. He used it to build an amazing capital city back home in Ghazni. So every temple he plundered was a double win. He got money for his kingdom, and he completely destroyed the prestige of his enemies. But hey, power wasn't all about swords and armies. Rulers also had a much more subtle language they used, a language spoken with words, with money, and with pure, simple influence. You know, history itself could be a powerful weapon. You had all these educated men in the courts who would write histories praising their rulers, talking up all their achievements. Why? Well, a really glowing review could get them a lot of favor, maybe some land, and definitely some wealth. It really proves that the pen can be just as mighty as the sword when you're trying to build a legacy.
And speaking of influence, wow, few people were as good at it as Nur Jahan, the wife of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. She wasn't just a queen, she was a serious political force, and she found a brilliant and very public way to let everyone know it. This is just so clever. Nur Jahan had silver coins made with her own title stamped right on them. Now you have to remember, in that era, currency was the ultimate symbol of who was in charge. So putting her name on a coin right next to the emperor's, that was a crystal clear statement of her authority that nobody could miss. So, you've shown everyone how powerful you are, both on the battlefield and on something as small as a coin. But symbols alone can't hold a kingdom together. Now we get to the really hard part. How do you actually run a massive, sprawling kingdom? Let's look at the engine of the kingdom: administration. Rulers were dealing with this huge puzzle. How do you control lands that are hundreds of miles away? And just as important, how do you pay the powerful military commanders who are keeping you safe, especially if you're a bit short on cash? The solution was a pretty ingenious system called the ikta. It worked like this. Instead of a cash salary, a military commander, a mukti, would be given the right to collect taxes from a piece of land, an ikta. And just like that, you solve both problems at once. The land gets administered, and the commander gets paid from the money it generates. But this brought up a new and pretty controversial question. Who should get these powerful jobs? Should you stick with the traditional aristocrats and nobles? Or should a ruler promote the people who are most skilled and, most importantly, most loyal, no matter what their background was? Some rulers, like Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq, made choices that absolutely shocked the elites. A chronicler from the 14th century wrote, with some serious disapproval, that the Sultan appointed men of humble birth, a wine distiller, a barber, a cook, even 2 gardeners, to really high-up government jobs. For the Sultan, it was simple. Loyalty was way more important than lineage. But the story of this time is so much bigger than just the sultans and their nobles. Let's zoom out from the royal court for a minute and look at the incredibly diverse societies that existed all across the subcontinent. This slide gives us a fantastic contrast. On one side, you've got this centralized power of a huge empire, and on the other, a totally different kind of power, a fierce, regional, tribal kingdom. These two things didn't just exist separately, they lived side by side, and often they clashed. For instance, you had powerful tribal kingdoms like the Gonds. Their state, Garakatanga,
was ruled by amazing figures like Rani Durgawati, and they got incredibly rich by capturing and exporting wild elephants. Then you had the Ahoms up in the northeast, who built a really strong state that depended on a system of forced labor from people called Paiks.
But far, far away from any seat of power, life was completely different. We have this vivid description from a 12th century text that gives us a little peek into a small village of the Pulayas, a group that was considered outcast. It describes farm laborers doing really tough work, and it talks about dark children who wore bracelets of black iron. It's just a powerful reminder of the huge spectrum of life that existed way beyond the palace walls.
So, what happens when you have these grand empires, these rising tribal states, and this really complex social order all living together on one subcontinent? Well, you get one thing: constant conflict. This map really shows you the political reality of the time. This wasn't one single unified empire. It was more like a patchwork quilt of competing kingdoms and dynasties, all of them fighting for land, resources, and just the right to be on top. And all through this period, new challengers were constantly popping up. In the Deccan, you had Shivaji, who used brilliant guerrilla warfare to build the mighty Maratha state. In Rajasthan, Rajput rulers like Savai Raja Jai Singh were expanding their influence, building incredible new capitals like Jaipur. And up in the Punjab, the Sikh community, the Khalsa, became such a strong political force that they eventually declared their own rule and started minting their own coins. The most important thing to take away from all this is that nothing was ever static. Power was fluid. It was always shifting. The subcontinent was just too big and had too many different groups of people for anyone to have total, permanent control. This meant dynasties rose, empires crumbled, and there was always a new challenger waiting for their turn. Nobody's position was ever really secure. So that leaves us with one final big question. In a world defined by constant struggle, where whole kingdoms could rise and fall in a single generation, what is it that truly builds a legacy that lasts? Is it wealth? Is it winning battles? Or is it something else entirely?